7 Dangerous Carl Jung Psychology Places That Destroy Your Mind. Carl Jung, the renowned Swiss psychiatrist, uncovered 7 psychological environments that can silently erode one's mental strength. These aren't physical places but rather mental traps we unknowingly enter daily. Most people spend years in these spaces, feeling drained, anxious, or lost, often blaming themselves. However, Jung recognized that certain environments can literally rewire your brain to work against you. In 1961, Jung treated a patient who appeared perfectly normal but was slowly losing his mind. Upon investigation, Jung traced the problem back to 7 specific psychological spaces this man inhabited daily. Once Jung helped him recognize and escape these mental traps, the patient's transformation was profound. The first and most dangerous of these environments is the echo chamber. In this space, every voice around you mirrors your own thoughts, beliefs, and biases, reinforcing them until they feel like absolute truth. Jung's patients spent hours each day in social clubs and political gatherings where everyone shared his exact views, fears about social changes, and anger towards certain groups. He thought he was staying informed, but Jung realized he was getting psychologically poisoned. Research by Dr. Matthew Lieberman at UCLA shows that when you're never challenged, your critical thinking abilities weaken, akin to unused muscles atrophying. Jung termed this phenomenon collective possession, where group thinking replaces individual thought, leading to a rigid, fragile worldview terrified of different perspectives. The warning signs you're trapped in an echo chamber include being able to predict what everyone around you will say about any topic, feeling personally threatened by differing opinions, and ceasing to question your core beliefs. Conversations reinforce rather than challenge your thinking, and your mind becomes smaller, more fearful, and more dependent on the group for psychological safety. The second dangerous environment is the comparison arena. Here, your worth is measured against everyone else's achievements and status. Jung's patient, already fragile from echo chamber thinking, began obsessively comparing his life to others in his social circle. Every success story from acquaintances felt like personal failure. Dr. Rachel Kaliger's research at the University of the West of England proves what Jung observed. Constant comparison literally shrinks the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for self-worth and decision-making. This creates an inflation-deflation cycle, where you either feel superior or inferior, never simply yourself. Warning signs you're in the comparison arena include feeling like a failure when others succeed, achieving goals but feeling empty because someone did it better, and editing your life to match what looks successful rather than what feels right. This environment disconnects you from your own values and desires, causing you to chase recognition instead of joy. The third environment is the performance theater. In this space, authenticity is punished, and you're rewarded only for wearing the right mask. Jung's patient worked in a corporate environment where showing any vulnerability was career suicide. He learned to laugh at jokes that weren't funny, agree with ideas he opposed, and hide any part of himself that didn't fit the company culture. Jung called this persona identification, where the mask you wear becomes the only identity you recognize. Over time, this leads to a loss of self, as the real you becomes a stranger. Warning signs you're in a performance theater include feeling exhausted after social interactions, agreeing with things you don't believe, and being afraid to share opinions that might be unpopular. You feel like you're wearing a costume that you can't take off, and your real thoughts and feelings seem dangerous or inappropriate. The fourth environment is the silent suffering space, where emotional needs are buried under the illusion of stability. Jung encountered this constantly in his practice, treating patients from perfect families where love was assumed but never expressed, where problems were ignored rather than addressed. The patient Jung treated came from exactly this type of family. He learned that having needs was selfish and expressing pain was weakness. This environment creates what Jung called emotional starvation, where unmet emotional needs fester in the unconscious, leading to anxiety, depression, and inexplicable emptiness. Warning signs you're trapped in silent suffering include feeling lonely even when surrounded by people, learning to cope with pain rather than heal from it, and feeling that asking for emotional support is selfish or weak. Peace in your relationships feels brittle, like it could shatter if you're too honest. The fifth environment is the chaos storm, where constant mental stimulation drowns out your inner voice until you can't hear yourself think. Jung's patient lived in this state constantly, filling every quiet moment with reading, conversation, or activity because silence felt unbearable. But Jung realized this wasn't preference, it was avoidance. The patient was afraid of what he might discover in stillness, unresolved pain, difficult decisions, or parts of himself he didn't want to face. Dr. Adam Gazzaley's research at UCSF shows that chronic mental stimulation literally impairs your ability to form coherent thoughts and make clear decisions. Warning signs you're trapped in the chaos storm include immediately reaching for a book, newspaper, or turning on the radio when silence occurs, having strong opinions about everything but deep understanding of nothing, and feeling busy but unable to remember what you accomplished. Slowing down triggers anxiety rather than peace. The sixth environment is the self-abandonment chamber, where you systematically ignore your own needs, instincts, and truth. This is the most insidious place because it happens gradually. You say yes when everything inside screams no. You stay in relationships that drain you because leaving feels harder than enduring. You choose comfort over authenticity, safety over growth. Jung's patient described it perfectly. I became so good at ignoring my gut instincts that I stopped having them. Dr. Bessel. Van der Kolk's research on trauma shows that chronic self-abandonment literally disconnects you from your body's wisdom. Warning signs you're in the self-abandonment chamber include not remembering the last time you checked in with your own feelings, making decisions based on what's expected rather than what feels right, and feeling like you're living on autopilot. When someone asks what you want, you genuinely don't know. The seventh and most dangerous environment exists entirely within your own mind, the shadow basement. Here, you've locked away parts of yourself you're too afraid or ashamed to face. Jung's patient had spent years avoiding this internal space. Every time painful memories, shameful thoughts, or difficult emotions surfaced, he pushed them down into what Jung called the personal unconscious. But Jung discovered something terrifying: what you bury doesn't stay buried. It grows stronger in the darkness, influencing your behavior in ways you don't understand. Dr. Peter Levine's research on trauma shows that unprocessed emotional content literally lives in your nervous system, creating chronic dysregulation until it's consciously integrated. Jung called this shadow possession, where the parts of yourself you've rejected start controlling your life from the unconscious. Warning signs you're avoiding the shadow basement include having strong emotional reactions that surprise you, repeating relationship patterns despite knowing better, and feeling like you're fighting an invisible enemy inside yourself. Jung realized that healing requires descending into this basement, not with self-judgment but with curiosity and compassion. By confronting and integrating these hidden parts of yourself, you can reclaim your power and achieve psychological freedom. Recognizing these 7 dangerous environments is the first step. The next is escaping them. Jung developed a process called individuation, a journey of self-discovery and integration. This involves becoming consciously aware of these environments, examining every space you regularly enter, both physical and digital, and limiting exposure to toxic psychological environments. Small changes, such as limiting time in toxic social circles, setting boundaries with negative people, and creating daily periods of solitude and reflection, can help you reclaim your mental strength and live a. In the early 1960s, Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist, encountered a patient whose life seemed outwardly stable yet was unraveling internally. This man, like many others, was unknowingly ensnared by 7 psychological environments that, over time, had eroded his mental strength. These weren't physical places but mental traps that subtly shaped his thoughts, behaviors, and relationships. The first of these environments was the echo chamber. In this space, every conversation mirrored his own beliefs and biases, reinforcing them until they felt like undeniable truths. Surrounded by like-minded individuals in social clubs and political gatherings, he believed he was staying informed. However, Jung recognized that this constant affirmation stifled critical thinking, leading to a narrow and fragile worldview. Next was the comparison arena, where his self-worth was measured against others' achievements. Each success story from acquaintances felt like a personal failure. This constant comparison led to feelings of inadequacy and a disconnection from his own values and desires. The performance theater was another environment he inhabited. In this space, authenticity was punished, and he was rewarded only for wearing the right mask. At work, he learned to agree with ideas he opposed and hide any part of himself that didn't fit the company culture. This led to a loss of self, as the real him became a stranger. Then there was the silent suffering space, where emotional needs were buried under the illusion of stability. In his family, love was assumed but never expressed, and problems were ignored rather than addressed. He learned that having needs was selfish and expressing pain was weakness. This environment created what Jung called emotional starvation, where unmet emotional needs festered in the unconscious, leading to anxiety and depression. The chaos storm was another environment he faced. Here, constant mental stimulation drowned out his inner voice until he couldn't hear himself think. Filling every quiet moment with reading or conversation felt like avoidance. He was afraid of what he might discover in stillness, unresolved pain or difficult decisions. The self-abandonment chamber was perhaps the most insidious. In this space, he systematically ignored his own needs and truth. He said yes when everything inside screamed no, stayed in draining relationships, and chose comfort over authenticity. This gradual self-neglect led to a disconnection from his own desires and values. Lastly, there was the shadow basement, where parts of his soul were locked away. Jung believed that until you face what you've hidden in the shadow basement, you'll unconsciously recreate toxic patterns everywhere you go. This required confronting constant affirmations stifled critical thinking, leading to a narrow and fragile worldview. Next was the comparison arena, where his self-worth was measured against others' achievements. Each success story from acquaintances felt like a personal failure. This constant comparison led to feelings of inadequacy and a disconnection from his own values and desires. The performance theater was another environment he inhabited. In this space, authenticity was punished, and he was rewarded only for wearing the right mask. At work, he learned to agree with ideas he opposed and hide any part of himself that didn't fit the company culture. This led to a loss of self, as the real him became a stranger. Then there was the silent suffering space, where emotional needs were buried under the illusion of stability. In his family, love was assumed but never expressed, and problems were ignored rather than addressed. He learned that having needs was selfish and expressing pain was weakness. This environment created what Jung called emotional starvation, where unmet emotional needs festered in the unconscious, leading to anxiety and depression. The chaos storm was another environment he faced. Here, constant mental stimulation drowned out his inner voice until he couldn't hear himself think. Filling every quiet moment with reading or conversation felt like avoidance. He was afraid of what he might discover in stillness, unresolved pain or difficult decisions. Repressed desires and emotions, often through therapy or journaling. Recognizing these environments was the first step toward healing. Jung helped his patient understand that these spaces were not just external circumstances but internal patterns that could be changed. By consciously choosing to step out of these environments, the patient began to reclaim his mental strength. His relationships improved, his decision-making clarified, and he developed what Jung called psychological sovereignty, the ability to make choices that align with his true self. This transformation wasn't just personal. As he changed, his environment began to change as well. His family, initially resistant to his new boundaries and emotional honesty, gradually began to heal. His authenticity gave others permission to be real, leading to deeper connections and mutual understanding. Jung's insights into these psychological environments offer a profound understanding of how our mental spaces shape our lives. By recognizing and consciously choosing to step out of these environments, we can reclaim our mental strength and live more authentic, fulfilling lives. In a quiet village nestled between rolling hills, there lived a man named Elias. From the outside, His life seemed peaceful, he had a modest home, a steady job, and a family that loved him. Yet, beneath the surface, Elias grappled with a deep sense of unease, a feeling that something was amiss but he couldn't quite pinpoint what. One evening, while perusing an old library, Elias stumbled upon a dusty book by Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist whose ideas intrigued him. As he read, he discovered that Jung had identified several psychological environments that could subtly, yet profoundly, shape one's mind and spirit. These weren't physical places, but patterns of thought and behavior that, over time, could rewire the brain and alter one's perception of self and reality. The first environment Jung described was the echo chamber. Elias realized that in his daily life, he often surrounded himself with people who shared his views and beliefs, rarely challenging his perspectives. While this provided comfort, it also limited his growth and understanding. He began to see that true wisdom often comes from engaging with differing viewpoints and embracing the discomfort that comes with it. Next, Elias recognized the comparison trap. He had spent much of his life measuring his worth against others, especially in the age of social media, where curated highlights of others' lives made his seem lacking. This constant comparison eroded his self-esteem and kept him focused on what he lacked instead of appreciating what he had. Jung's words echoed in his mind, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the pair." This transformation wasn't just personal. As he changed, his environment began to change as well. His family, initially resistant to his new boundaries and emotional honesty, gradually began to heal. His authenticity gave others permission to be real, leading to deeper connections and mutual understanding. Jung's insights into these psychological environments offer a profound understanding of how our mental spaces shape our lives. By recognizing and consciously choosing to step out of these environments, we can reclaim our mental strength and live more authentic, fulfilling lives. In a quiet village nestled between rolling hills, there lived a man named Elias. From the outside, his life seemed peaceful, he had a modest home, a steady job, and a family that loved him. Yet, beneath the surface, Elias grappled with a deep sense of unease, a feeling that something was amiss but he couldn't quite pinpoint what. One evening, while perusing an old library, Elias stumbled upon a dusty book by Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist whose ideas intrigued him. As he read, he discovered that Jung had identified several psychological environments that could subtly, yet profoundly, shape one's mind and spirit. These weren't physical places, but patterns of thought and behavior that, over time, could rewire the brain and alter one's perception of self and reality. The first environment Jung described was the echo chamber. Elias realized that in his daily life, he often surrounded himself with people who shared his views and beliefs, rarely challenging his perspectives. While this provided comfort, it also limited his growth and understanding. He began to see that true wisdom often comes from engaging with differing viewpoints and embracing the discomfort that comes with it. NTS. Elias understood that he was not just living his life, but also carrying the unfulfilled dreams and expectations of others. The performance theater was another environment that struck a chord with Elias. In his workplace and social circles, authenticity was often sacrificed for the sake of conformity. He found himself agreeing with opinions he didn't hold, laughing at jokes that didn't amuse him, and suppressing his true feelings to fit in. Over time, he lost touch with his authentic self, becoming a mere actor playing a role. Jung had warned of this danger, and Elias now saw its impact on his life. The silent suffering space was perhaps the most insidious. In his family, emotions were rarely expressed. Love was assumed but never spoken, and problems were ignored rather than addressed. Elias had learned to suppress his feelings, believing that expressing pain was a sign of weakness. This emotional suppression led to a sense of emptiness and disconnection. The chaos storm was another environment that Elias had unknowingly embraced. He filled every quiet moment with distractions, news, social media, work, to avoid facing his inner turmoil. This constant mental stimulation prevented him from processing his emotions and made it difficult to find clarity. The self-abandonment chamber was perhaps the most subtle. Elias had spent so much time trying to meet the expectations of others that he had lost touch with his own needs and desires. He made decisions based on what was expected of him, not what felt right. This led to a profound sense of disconnection from his true self. Finally, there was the shadow basement. Elias had repressed parts of himself, his anger, his fears, his desires, that he deemed unacceptable. These hidden aspects influenced his behavior in ways he didn't understand, often sabotaging his relationships and goals. Jung had taught that what we deny in ourselves doesn't disappear, it grows stronger in the darkness. As Elias reflected on these environments, he realized that his unease was not a random feeling but a result of these subtle, yet powerful, influences. He understood that healing required more than just awareness, it required action. He began to step out of the echo chamber by seeking diverse perspectives, to break free from the comparison trap by embracing his unique path, to shed the performance theater by embracing authenticity, to express his emotions in the silent suffering space, to find stillness amidst the chaos storm, to reconnect with his true self in the self-abandonment chamber, and to confront his shadow basement with courage and compassion. Through this journey, Elias discovered that healing was not about escaping these environments but about transforming them. By integrating the lessons they offered, he began to reclaim his life, not as a passive participant but as an active creator of his own story. Jung's teachings had illuminated a path to self-awareness and growth, and Elias was ready to walk it. Once, Carl Jung treated a man who felt lost and disconnected from himself. This man had spent years in environments that subtly shaped him into someone he didn't recognize. He had been in echo chambers that reinforced his biases, comparison arenas that made him feel inadequate, performance theaters where he wore a mask, silent suffering spaces where emotions were suppressed, chaos storms that drowned out his inner voice, self-abandonment chambers where he ignored his needs, and shadow basements where he hid parts of himself. Jung understood that these environments didn't just affect his patient's mood, they rewired his brain. The man had learned to expect failure and criticism, even in safe spaces. He had become so good at being what others wanted that he forgot what he wanted. His real thoughts and feelings seemed dangerous or inappropriate. Jung believed that healing required more than just avoiding these toxic environments. It required a conscious effort to change one's relationship with them. He developed a process called individuation to help individuals reclaim their psychological sovereignty. The first step in this process was conscious recognition. The patient had to honestly assess which of these environments he inhabited daily. This required brutal honesty without self-judgment. The second step was an environmental audit. The patient examined every space he regularly entered, both physical and digital. Jung taught that awareness transforms unconscious influence into conscious choice. The patient asked himself, does this environment help me grow or keep me small? The third step was strategic withdrawal. The patient didn't need to abandon his life, but he had to limit exposure to toxic psychological environments. He started with small changes, like limiting time in toxic social circles, setting boundaries with negative people, and creating daily periods of solitude and reflection. The fourth step was conscious integration. Instead of just avoiding negative environments, the patient consciously created positive ones. He sought out people who challenged him kindly, environments that supported growth, and spaces where authenticity was valued. The fifth step was shadow work. Jung believed that until the patient faced what he'd hidden in the shadow basement, he'd unconsciously recreate toxic patterns. This required therapy, journaling, or other methods of bringing unconscious content into awareness. The sixth step was regular maintenance. Jung discovered that psychological freedom requires ongoing vigilance. These dangerous places are seductive because they offer false comfort, easy belonging, or familiar patterns. The patient had to consciously choose growth over comfort, truth over convenience. After 6 months, the patient told Jung, I didn't realize how much mental energy I was spending in those toxic spaces. Now that I've left them, I feel like I have my mind back. Jung documented remarkable transformations when people escaped these psychological traps. Within 3 months of leaving the echo chamber, the patient's critical thinking improved dramatically. He started questioning his assumptions, seeking diverse perspectives, and making decisions based on evidence rather than groupthink. After escaping the comparison arena, he discovered interests and goals that were genuinely his own. He stopped measuring his worth against others and started pursuing work that aligned with his values rather than his image. Leaving the performance theater was harder because it required disappointing people who preferred his mask to his authentic self. But Jung taught him that relationships based on false performance aren't real relationships at all. The silent suffering space required learning entirely new communication skills. The patient had to practice expressing needs, setting boundaries, and asking for support, skills his family had never modeled. Escaping the chaos storm meant developing tolerance for stillness, boredom, and the anxiety that initially arose in quiet moments. But Jung knew that wisdom only emerges in contemplative space. The self-abandonment chamber required the scariest change, making decisions based on his own truth rather than external expectations. This meant disappointing some people, but it also meant finally living authentically. The shadow basement work was ongoing, but each integration made him more whole, more compassionate, and less likely to project his issues onto others. Jung observed that people who escape these places don't just feel better. They become different people entirely. Their relationships improve, their decision-making clarifies, and they develop what Jung called psychological sovereignty. Jung's final lesson was that these places will always exist and they'll always be seductive. Echo chambers offer easy belonging. Comparison arenas promise motivation. Performance theaters provide approval. Silent suffering feels like peace. Chaos storms distract from pain. Self-abandonment avoids conflict. Shadow basements hide shame. But true mental strength comes from choosing growth over comfort, authenticity over approval, and consciousness over convenience. The question isn't whether you'll encounter these dangerous places. You will. The question is, will you recognize them when you do? Will you have the courage to leave? And will you create the kind of psychological environment where others can be free too? Psychological environment where others can be free too? Jung believed that the future of human consciousness depends on individuals brave enough to choose psychological freedom over collective unconsciousness. That choice starts with recognizing where you are right now and deciding where you want to be. Your mind is not your enemy, but the places you allow it to inhabit might be. The man Jung treated in 1961 went on to become a therapist himself, helping others recognize and escape these same psychological traps. He understood that mental strength isn't about avoiding difficulty. It's about choosing which difficulties,